Hey everybody, I'm going to show you a couple of projects this week that relate to planters. Well, they are planters. I'm also going to include a little video on how to make a saucer that will keep your planter up out of the water that runs through when you water your planter. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to throw a planter with a functional, nice rim that's going to make it easy to move around. And I'll also show you how to make that saucer. Here goes. All right, I've got 4.5 pounds of clay here. I'm going to divide it in half and show you two small planters that might be nice for a house plant or even something cute outside. I like to make my planters as direct and easy as possible. So I'm going to show you how to make it with the hole kind of built in from the beginning. So you don't necessarily have to trim, you just throw it and it's done. Nice thing also about making planters is the plants never complain. They're happy to have a place to live. So it's a pretty low stress operation. You do want to be able to get things out of the planter when they need to size up to a new planter. So it's important to have a little bit outward taper. So that if you've got something with a pretty good root system, it's not going to get root bound in the pot. All right, so what I'm going to do to make my life easier is just open all the way to the wheelhead. That's going to put a drainage hole in the middle of my piece. I don't have to come back later and cut a drainage hole. So I'll make it big enough that it's going to drain, but not so big that I have to worry about the soil all falling out the bottom. It's about 1 inch in diameter. And then I'll come up whatever thickness I want the bottom of my pot to be, about 1/4 inch. And I will draw the base out until I'm happy that I've got a nice interior diameter. Still got my drainage hole in there. I'm just kind of making sure everything looks good down in the bottom before I get the walls up and in my way. The first one I'm going to show you is just leaving a thickened rim that's going to just give you something to hold on to when you need to pick this thing up. These aren't huge, so you don't need to go crazy, but I'm going to just show you this one. It's a really good exercise for you too, because anytime we make a cylinder-based pot, it's nice if we can learn to leave extra material up at the rim. So this is a good warm-up. Just drawing the clay out, and I'm going to stop below the rim and pause and let go and leave this thicker clay. I'm going to go ahead and compress it a little bit more. And I'll do my second pull. This makes your pot sturdier, and I'm going to just kick this top out a little bit, and that'll give you something nice to grab a hold of when you're going to go move this plant from your porch to your sunroom or whatever you're going to do with it. I like to dry them out. I like to use some ribs on them. It's not important to have the interior super smooth, but I just like them to look kind of finished and compressed. So I'm going to use a rib inside and out, but I'm going to kind of keep my rib from going all the way up to the rim. I want to stop at the rim and leave that thick clay up at the top. Before I get too carried away with the shaping, which is, it's a flower pot, so how fancy can you get? I want to take my wood knife and I want to remove that little skirt of clay at the bottom. I want to even maybe round it a little bit because, that's the point where it's heavy, it's full of soil, it's full of plants. If you set it down on a little thin edge, it's going to probably end up chipping. And that doesn't render it useless. It's just, I think you'll be happier if you plan ahead and make for a durable bottom. So here I'm going to come in. I'm going to start out with my tool pretty much parallel to the wall of the pot and start cutting off anything that's sticking out beyond that line that I want. And when I get really near the bottom, I can kind of turn the tool under a little bit. And that's not normally the way I teach wood knife technique. I'm usually very adamant that you go in straight, you come back out straight, but you can actually get away with that little bit of turning underneath. And sometimes that's a handy little trick to have in your bag of tricks. Because you can see when I pull that off, it's gotten rid of all this extra at the bottom, and it's also rounded it out so that all that's going to need to happen to this is when it comes off the wheel, I'm going to put my, at leather hard, I'm going to put my finger in the middle of the hole there and just kind of give it a little spin to make sure there's no sharp edge. And I'll probably give the outside bottom edge a little thumbing over to just make sure that it's happy and not sharp. Stopping there at the rim. And that's about as simple and kind of satisfying a project you can get done in about 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and make sure there's no skim of clay down there at the bottom. And what I'm going to do now is clean my hands, take this, set it aside, and grab you another one and just show you one variation on how to do the rim. So I'll be right back. Option number 2 for a nice rim that'll make it easier to pick up is basically a folded over rim. So if you watched the drop rim bowl exercise from way back when, it's a similar idea, but we're going to apply this to a planter. So let's just center up. I'll talk less through the opening parts because that's all going to be the same. Get it nice and centered. I'll open all the way to the wheel head again. Keep going until you hit metal. Come out just a little bit with your finger on the metal and then come up 1/4 inch and bring that floor out nice and level. I'm using that little trick where I put my right thumb down on the wheel so that as I draw I've got kind of a guide and I can keep my fingers running really level. I like that trick. All right, we're just going to pull this one up. We're not going to be as careful to keep the top thick because we're going to just fold it over. So I'm just going to continue all the way up to the rim. Still going to compress. We'll fold that or pull that up again. I don't know if you noticed, but I wasn't in any hurry to start rising. I left my outside hand down there against the wheel until I actually got a hold of that clay and started bringing it up. I think a lot of times we think, oh my gosh, I'm pulling. I've got to start rising towards the rim immediately. But it's actually not at all true. It's better if when you're starting the pull, you get down in position, your inside hand is just gently touching the floor and your outside hand actually touches the wheel and stays there until you get a hold of the clay that you want. And then they can rise towards the top. I don't really need a third pull on this, so I'm going to just skim over the top until I get to the rim, hang out, hold still, slowly release. All right, there's no reason why you couldn't have a very straight, minimalist kind of shape on a planter, but I do think that there's some advantage to having the rim extra thick or folded over so that they're just easier to pick up, because they can be heavy when they're full of soil, and especially if that soil's wet. Before I do all that fanciness, I'm going to take my wood knife and just clean the base. Kind of snuck that up underneath, rounded it out just a little bit. All right, I'm gonna run the rib across it because I like to have kind of a crisp surface. It'll help me just make sure everything is happy and stable before I start trying to fold that rim over. That time I was comfortable going all the way up to the rim. Okay, so one more pass. Still a fair amount of goo on the inside there. All right, that's better. Folding the rim over. I guess you have to be a little bit careful that you don't create a sealed donut of air over there. So what I'm really trying to do is just fold it on itself and push the air out the bottom. It's just a way of having a double thickness top. So I'm gonna put my outside middle finger against the wall at the point where I want the fold to happen. And I'm just gonna start stretching the clay outward. And you just keep stretching that rim until it gets close to horizontal. And then once you're getting to the point where you feel pretty close, you can, probably it's not a bad idea to just take your chamois and finish that edge a little before it's upside down. And you know, it's out there over empty space, so eventually it'll just drop. So I'm gonna just push it down. But here's the trick. If I try to push down on this outer edge, it's past vertical, it's hanging lower than horizontal. I meant past horizontal. If I just keep pushing down, effectively I'm asking this diameter to get narrower. So just pushing on it is not really gonna work. So what I wanna do instead is stretch this inner part out over the top of it. So it's just a little bit of different way of thinking about the mechanics of what's happening. And we can stretch easily from the inside of a form at one point and have something happen. If we try to collar, which is effectively what we'd be doing if we were pushing down on this rim at a single point, it tends to buckle and be unhappy with you. So I'm just gonna take the rib and stretch out the rim, and I'll keep the outer part of that folded rim from going any wider. Now we're getting almost to the point where it's folded over into a nice tight V. Now it's out there looking pretty much like the classic flower pot shape. I'll come from the inside and just refine the profile. It's got a little bit of wabi-sabi. Clean it up a little bit more. And that's about where I want it. Take the rib on the outside and clean that up. And then I actually like to take my chamois and put it over what's now the new rim and give it a little compression. And that just helps it be stronger and also to kind of look like it was the original top of the form. And doesn't get really any more classic than that for a flower pot shape. And there's a reason sometimes why shapes are classic. It's because they work well and they don't necessarily need reinventing. So give that one a shot. It's a really good exercise. It's an opportunity to pull some clay up into a nice even-walled cylinder. And that folding technique is something that will come in handy in a lot of different ways. If you're making teapot lids, if you're making drop rim bowls, all those things, that flipping of the rim is a nice technique to have in your toolbox. The last planter related technique that I want to share with you in this video is how to make a saucer that will elevate the bottom of your planter up out of the juice that's left over when you run too much water through the pot. It's nice if there's a little bit of an air gap. And this is kind of a fun little thing to throw, and you can really never have too many of them. if you keep potted plants. So you'll enjoy it. I'll show you really quick. All right, we're going to center up this piece of clay. I'm making sure that I draw in a little bit with my right hand as I first center, because I want to make sure that there's no gaps or voids where the ball of clay met in this case, the bat, but the wheel head. If you've got any little gaps and you start pushing down and trap those little voids, you won't have a nice smooth bottom. So once I get it centered narrower, then I let my right hand ooze outward a little bit and keep pushing down on top. I'm still pulling back against it and keeping that edge sealed, but I'm letting it get wider at the same time. Okay, now what I want to do is in the center here, I want to take it down to a finished thickness that doesn't require trimming. So for me, that's going to be a nice 1/4 inch thickness. I'm a little over still, so I'm going to go down a little farther. And then I want to think about the size of the bottom of my planter, and they're about like yay. So I'm going to just pull out a little less far than that, because I want to leave a ring of clay for the base of the planter to sit on. I'll take that and kind of push it down. And then I'm going to subdivide this wall. I'm going to leave behind some clay for the planter to sit on. And it needs to be kind of sturdy because the plant's going to be clunking up and down on that thing. So I'm going to just press down. And I want to get my outside hand level with my inside hand. And I'm going to really compress this ring. And so the plant is going to sit up on that ring, and then I need to create space beyond that ring to catch the overflow watering liquid. And I probably could have subdivided that clay a little bit more aggressively toward the inside. I've got more clay than I really want on this ring, but it doesn't really matter if the planter sits up above the saucer. I can also just compress it more. So that my outer rim sticks up. That should be pretty nice. I'm going to take the chamois and smooth this out. And then I'm going to take my wood knife and just go ahead. I like these to be just done too, no trimming involved. So I'll just take my wood knife and trim the outside of that saucer. I like to use these planter type exercises as ways to warm up toward making more complicated forms, or if I've got just some extra clay that I want to use up, planters are always good. So I'm going to show you a trick. I want to allow the water that's going to catch in the inner part here to flow out to the outer part. So I'm going to take and I'm going to mark 4 cardinal directions using my wire. So I've got my east, west, and what was my north, south. So I've got that marked, and then I'm going to come diagonally to either side a similar amount. And this is going to lay out little spaces to cut away. And it's going to be under the planter, so it doesn't have to be perfect, not at all. But This is a technique that's really useful. You take your wire tool and you get just a little bit in between, maybe an inch between your fingers, and you kind of embed by putting pressure on the end of the wire into the tip of your finger, into the flesh of your finger. And then what you can do is cut down until your fingers touch this surrounding base clay, and then cut back up into your next mark. And it allows me to remove these chunks of clay really pretty accurately without cutting any deeper, because my fingers hit the base of the saucer there. Now, twice I've dragged my knuckle on the outer wall, and it's okay. I will come back and re-chamois that, but if I was being really careful, I'd get in there and not make a mess. So I suppose it looks like some kind of weird ashtray situation, but these really work great. I've got them under a lot of my plants on the porch out there, and I really like the way that the water drains, especially if you've got something like a citrus tree or succulents that really need that drainage to be happy and healthy. This is a good way to accomplish it. So if I can locate my chamois, there it is. I'll just go back over the outer rim and get that a nice little finished look. And when this gets to leather hard, you just want to go along on all those little cut edges with a clean pad of a finger and just, I call it touching it back. You want to take all the sharp edges and just give them a little press so that they become less sharp. And that way the planter will sit on there without it kind of hitting little sharp raised fins and potentially making chips in your pot. A lot of times I don't even bother glazing this part. Sometimes I'll glaze the outside of it for looks, and you can actually fire your planter sitting on it. If you want to save room in the kiln, a lot of times I'll just wax the bottom of the planter and fire them together as a unit, and that's a pretty efficient way to stack the kiln. So enjoy that. It's a really fun project, and it'll be a good way to just get used to moving some clay in a way that doesn't put you under a lot of stress to produce the most perfect profile. The plant's going to be happy whatever you do. So yeah, de-stress, get some new house plants, and have fun with the project this week.